Episode 22 with Preston Sprinkle.
Hey everybody, you're listening to the Never Forsaken podcast, looking at the lives of the outcasts, the seekers, the never forsakens, those in or out of the local church and passionate about Christ. The show is broadcast weekly, and show notes and more information can be found at neverforsakenpodcast.com. I'm your host, John Robinson. Let's get into the show.
Thanks for tuning in again to the Never Forsaken podcast. Just wanted to let you know of some new information this week. Actually, started posting all of the podcasts up on YouTube, and I don't really have a good link that you can remember to access it. So I'm going to make sure I put the link up on the social media, and I'll put links on Twitter and on Facebook and on the website on neverforsakenpodcast.com. So if you can get over to that link on YouTube and you can subscribe. I need like 100 subscribers in order to come up with a custom URL. Right now it's just a bunch of letters and numbers that I can't even remember. So I'll post those links up. If you're a YouTuber, you can just get on there and you can check out. I got a couple of different playlists with different themes, and I have a playlist that will just play all of it. So if you want to just check that out, greatly appreciate it. Also, if you want to head over to patreon.com/neverforsakenpodcast, you have a chance over there to support the show with a couple $1 a month. Just helps to alleviate some of the fees that I pay to have a podcast. Not making any money off of it, just help kind of cover the expenses. So that's patreon.com/neverforsakenpodcast. Thank you and enjoy the show. Hey, my guest today is Dr. Preston Sprinkle. Preston is an author, a speaker, teacher, the vice president of Eternity Bible College in Boise. Preston, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm glad to be here.
No problem. I was really looking forward to this conversation. And actually, when I reached out to you a few months ago, you had been doing some blogging about millennials and the whole nuns and leaving the church, and that's what I first wanted our conversation to be about. But we got sidetracked, and I think this is going to be a very timely episode.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
So, out of all your writings, Preston, I actually started with the book "Fight: A Christian Case for Nonviolence," and I felt there was a fantastic exploration of the Old Testament God in comparison with Christ, violence, war, and the intentions or the way that things really should have been. So what I'd like to do is just kind of start talking about Jesus and his nonviolent teachings, and then sort of work backwards through Scripture a little bit. So when Jesus shows up on the scene, what is the spiritual and the political climate like?
It's a very violent one to dive right into our topic. Jesus enters the scene right in the middle of the height of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire had, more or less conquered a good chunk of the known world by flexing its military muscles. And then you have against that backdrop a Jewish worldview that was, anticipating a violent, militant overthrow of their oppressors. And at this stage in the game, it was, their oppressors was Rome. And so Jesus comes on the scene as the Messiah, and in a culture where Messiah meant a military conqueror who will overthrow the superpower. And so you just have, so many seeds of a violent revolt being sowed. And so I think we have to read Jesus' statements about turning the other cheek, loving your enemy, his nonviolent posture throughout his ministry. We have to see that against the backdrop of this militant expectation. I think once you do that, it really, it highlights even more his nonviolent posture. But most people are going to say, yeah, Jesus wasn't violent. But if you look at the background, the context, I think it's like, whoa, he was like really not, he was intentionally nonviolent to kind of reverse this way of thinking.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's a common misconception that you hear a lot of times is like this 400 years of silence, and that the Jews are just somewhat very complacent, and really nothing's going on. There's no prophets, and that they're just silently under oppression. Which really, I don't really think they were so silent about it.
Not at all, no.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, the Maccabean revolt back in it was 167 BC, where this Jewish family overthrew at that time the Greek oppressors and gained about 80 years of independence, and that I don't think people realize how much that successful, violent overthrow of their oppressors, how much that shaped the Jewish way of thinking. And when Jesus comes on the scene, the sort of smoldering effect of that violent Maccabean revolt that's still in the air, and that's the air that people are breathing and expecting. And I think Jesus directly went against what the Maccabees did.
So it's like the Jews are basically they're craving a Messiah at this point, and as you mentioned that word Messiah it means king, and it signifies somebody who's going to come on the scene in violence and literally overthrow the government. So here's Jesus teaching in the midst of violent oppression. He's teaching that he's the Messiah. And so what makes that a dangerous teaching for him in light of the fact that on several occasions he forbids his disciples to tell anyone the things that he has said about him actually being the Messiah?
That's funny. I was going to go I was going to go there because that's, my students are always tripping out over how come Jesus, they confessed it is Messiah, and then he's like, shh, don't tell anyone. Like, why would he keep it quiet,
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the idea of a Messiah, it's so pumped full of political, military connotations that if people are running around saying, we found the Messiah, I mean, Rome is going to crash down hard on that. This is the idea of a Messiah is a political royal ruler who's going to overthrow his oppressors and do so violently. So again, it's just that whole Jesus telling his disciples to be quiet about the whole Messiah thing. I mean, that's just another piece of the puzzle to kind of help us understand that Jesus was trying to reverse this mentality, and it was really hard because so many people were expecting this violent revolutionary, and he worked hard to go against that.
Yeah, including many of his disciples,
Sure.
Who were zealots and whatnot. They must have really been looking forward to that. Jesus makes several statements in the scriptures, and he says things like, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I and the Father are one. And so there's really no doubt as to the unity between Jesus and his Father. And now you've got the Jews and the disciples that are following him. They know their history. They know their wars of the past. And so it's understandably difficult for a first century Jew to see. Is it going to be difficult for? Let me rephrase this. So, is it difficult for a first century Jew to see their Messiah as coming in power? I mean, in other words, they want to see a Messiah coming in power, but here's Jesus teaching the exact opposite. So, what does that make it difficult for them?
Yeah, I think so. It's not. So I would even say he did come in power, but he redefined where power is found. I mean, and I think that's looking back, I think that's a point I'm pretty sure I made in my book, but if I had to rewrite Fight, I think I would have maybe spent a whole chapter maybe talking more about that and make that more clear that, Jesus did come to conquer evil. He did come to, beat his enemies, if you will, but he reversed the whole mentality about how to go about that. So he absolutely came in more power from heaven than anybody could have, but he revealed that there is power in suffering, power in dying, power in loving, and that's the way you end up conquering people. And he proved that when he walked out of the grave. So, so I think that I think people were so not just steeped in a certain militant worldview, but they've seen the success of it. Not only the Maccabean revolt, but there was a lot of messiahs that gained, let me say would-be messiahs before Jesus that gained a big following. They fought against Rome, they fought against their oppressors, and they won for a little bit, but then they got squashed, So, I mean, you have such deep-rooted expectations that the true Messiah, if this guy's the true Messiah, then we're going to see Rome out of this country very quickly. And when Jesus gutted the meaning of power and conquering, that I think it took a long time, and we see this in the New Testament. It took people a long time to really understand where he was going with this thing. Even people like John the Baptist, began to doubt halfway through the ministry. Peter still chopping off ears, towards the end, and even people that walked with him and heard him teach, it took so long to kind of reverse this mindset, which just shows how steeped it was.
Well, so do you think that his followers were let down?
I think I think at first, yeah. I mean, I think in Matthew 11, when John the Baptist is in prison and he sends his messengers and says, hey, are you the coming one, or should we expect somebody else?
Yeah.
I'm saying, like, this doesn't look like it's working out the way I thought. I'm in prison, and then
Right.
of course, his head cut off a few months later, and even he's like, I think he believed that Jesus was the Christ, that he was the Son of God, but I think it was so different than what he was expecting that he did struggle with doubt. And, Peter, we see it in Peter's life, when Jesus is talking about going to the cross and suffering and dying, and Peter's like, no, you're not. Like, he's like correcting Jesus,
Right.
and, and then with the whole sword thing in the garden. So let down, I think it just took them a long time to truly believe that that this type of messiahship is going to work. Like, they just didn't have categories for, a dying and rising Messiah. They have, there's passages like Isaiah 53, but I think what's interesting in the Old Testament, you have these kind of militant messianic passages like Isaiah 11, Psalm 2, Psalm 110, and then you have the suffering passages in, Isaiah 53 and others. And I think given their history, I think that these militant messianic expectations sort of, swallowed up, all these other suffering ones, so that people, I think, lost sight of the fact that the Messiah is coming to suffer. And I think that, these militant passages kind of snuffed them out.
I'm glad you brought up the incident in the garden, because that has seemed to have been brought up on several social media occasions that I've read in the past couple of months, because, and we'll get into this in a little bit, but everything that we're going through in this country with guns and the right to bear arms, I see that scripture being pulled up a lot to use to defend self-defense. So I used to always understand it that way, but I'm not seeing it that way any longer. So I've always understood it as a fulfillment of a prophecy. What's your take on that?
I'm glad you brought that up too. I just wrote a blog a week and a half ago on that passage. It's Luke 22. I forget the verses, what is it, 30 something, where Jesus says, go buy a sword. He says, before I told you not to bring a sword, now go buy a sword. And his disciples say, hey, look, we got a couple swords. And Jesus, to my mind, he kind of rolls his eyes and says, it's enough, and what are two swords enough for? What does that statement even mean? And then Luke jumps in and says, this is to fulfill this prophecy in Isaiah 53. And most people, all they do is, even though I think Christians are, hopefully we know to read the Bible in context, to look at the whole passage, they just single out Jesus saying, buy a sword, and then they don't look at anything else. But yes, absolutely, these swords that a couple of disciples are packing. I think it was probably Simon the Zealot and Peter.
Probably.
It says this was to fulfill the prophecy in Isaiah 53 that Jesus would be numbered among his transgressors. Namely, he would be accused of being a transgressor, not like in the sinful spiritual sense, but in a political sense. In other words, Rome, in order to crucify Jesus, there would have to be evidence that this guy was a threat, that he was a revolutionary, that he deserved crucifixion. Rome, they didn't just crucify anybody. You had to, if you were like a military commander who went AWOL, or somebody committing treason, it was like we think Rome just kind of crucified anybody that looked at him wrong, but that's not. They were a little bit better than that. You had to do some really bad stuff to get crucified, and so Jesus had to be seen through the eyes of Rome as being a potential revolutionary. Now, having 12, or at that time 11, people kind of getting revved up, and then to discover they actually have swords on them, they're packing heat. That would be enough, as Jesus says, to allow Rome to move forward with crucifixion. I would say that's one of a couple different interpretations. But what's fascinating is when you look at actual evangelical scholars, like who write the commentaries on this passage, I had to search high and low to find a single credible evangelical scholar who says that, yes, Jesus is teaching self-defense with this passage. Like, nobody who studies the Bible in depth actually believes that. Like, I'm saying these evangelical scholars, they're not pacifists. These are all like, non-pacifists, but even they would say that no, this is not. Jesus is absolutely not saying, "Hey, pick up swords and defend yourself if somebody's attacking you." Like that's not it. That really has somehow trickled down into like American evangelical folklore. It's not, the people who study this stuff don't actually say that that's what the passage means, and I think that's pretty telling.
Yeah, that's been my finding as well, and I had a hard time to really find any justification for that violence and for war. Now, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the whole concept of a just war goes back to Augustine, and so I'm kind of wondering how does a modern Christian kind of get this whole concept of being so pro-military and pro-war? How have we graduated or developed into that mindset today?
Yeah, Augustine got it from, I believe, Aristotle and some Greek philosophers were kind of they talked about, and I don't know the details on this, but they talked about, just wars and unjust wars in basic form. And then Augustine, once the church and state were sort of married in the wake of Constantine, then they had to figure out how to have a just war. And Augustine is kind of he kind of, popularized it. I can't say that. Popularized. That's not a word. That's why I can't say. He made it popular.
Sure.
Up until Augustine, there's not a single Christian theologian, writer, pastor that we have record of that ever advocated for anything but nonviolence in the first 300 years of the church. And that, some people say, oh, that's debated. Well, I've looked at every single passage, literally, and there's not a shred. I mean, there's a couple debated, but there's not a single theologian that was arguing for some sort of just war until Augustine. Now, it's more, and I don't want to take too long on this, but it's really in the this is actually a fascinating study. In the 70s and 80s, when the sort of pro-military expansion Republican Party was sort of married to the moral majority, the religious right. And that was kind of the era when you couldn't be a Christian unless you were a Republican, and these two marriages came together, And I think that has really forged this idea that to be a true Christian means you're a patriot who you are pro-military. And if you're anti-military or even a little bit suspicious of the military, then you're probably an atheist. You might be a communist, again, going back to the kind of, end of the Cold War era. And you probably are pro-abortion. Like all these things were kind of came together. And I've got statements, and I think I have some in my book, Fight, where people would list being pro-abortion, anti-family, anti-war.
Right.
And all these things were held together. I think we're finally in an era now where people are unraveling these different values and saying, wait a minute, like you can be pro-Jesus, anti-war, and anti-abortion. Like these things aren't like related, So I think it was really the political marriage between the religious right and, the political right, if you will, that formed this idea that to be evangelical means you need to be pro, excessive military might. And I think it's really, really unfortunate.
Well, that's kind of the era I grew up in. I'm in my mid-40s, and so you're just kind of taught that when we grew up in the church. It's like you say, it's that kind of a marriage between those two views, the religious and the political. And I didn't know any other way until a couple of years ago. As I start to, I've been a few years removed from church per se, and so I, reading and studying on my own and whatnot. It's like, oh, okay, I kind of come to grips with like you said, I can be against war, and I'm a military veteran, and I'm, wow. Sometimes people can't believe I say some of the things I say about the military, about war and whatnot. But so keeping it along current lines, then. So do you think that Americans now, do we have kind of an unnatural affinity to guns and violence?
Oh, absolutely. And let me clarify too, the things I said about military and even what I'm going to say about guns. I'm not advocating necessarily for that everybody should be an advocate for nonviolence or pacifist, whatever. My bigger concern is just this unchecked addiction to military power and might. Like, I think that very, the whole question of, if somebody breaks into your house, wants to kill your family, can you use violence as a last resort? Like that's a really tough question. And I don't think, I certainly have a view on that, but I wouldn't say everybody should be right where I'm at. But I do think that to be Christian means that, gosh, you should not put your faith in this hyper military might. When you think about your enemies, your first response isn't kill them before they kill us. Like that is not in anywhere in Jesus' teaching. So when it comes to guns, I own guns. I went hunting yesterday. I own 4 guns. Like I don't know where I stand on the whole gun control bait. It is kind of in the political realm, and I don't know. But my main concern is that Christians, it seems like they value the Second Amendment higher than Matthew 5:44 that says love your enemies. Like one came from Jesus, another one is a man-made law. Like I'm not going to die for a man-made law. I'm not going to value a man-made law above what Jesus says. Like that's Christianity 101. Like, so yeah, I do think we have an over fascination with our freedom. It's my right to own guns and no one's going to take these guns away from me. Like that's not, you gave up your rights when you bowed the knee to Jesus.
That's a good word, Preston. That's a good word.
Like you don't have any rights. You're a slave to a Lord who said, love your enemies. So I think that's where the problem is. It's just these clash of values, and even I would say some idolatry towards American values of freedom and independence. And you step on my toes, and I will punch you in the nose, and I'm not going to take nothing from anybody. You get on my property, and you better watch out. Like this very secular American vengeful mindset of overpowering evil with more power is trickled down to the church. And it's so, sometimes if you try to unravel this or even explain it, people just get so angry. And it's like, man, where have we come, in this discussion?
Well, do you think that we're that far different than the ancient Hebrews who had a desire to have a king serve over them like other nations? And I'm not speaking as an American per se, because if let's say you're atheist or non-believer and you're an American, then yeah, you're going to be tuned into your president and all of that. But as a Christian, like you said, once you've bowed the knee to Jesus and you're under a different commander, right. But do you think that there's still a part of the American Christian that is hungry for that king to serve over us? And, it's so important that we get a godly president.
Yeah, I think so. Oh, yeah. I mean, not to get into too many politics, but it is fascinating how many evangelicals are so excited about Donald Trump. But this guy, I think, and again, just for the record, I've actually, the times I voted, I've only voted Republicans. I'm not some hippie liberal pot smoking guy, once. So, but man, I think Trump embodies so much of what evangelicals are looking for. A guy who's going to call it like it is and get rid of all these immigrants who are a possible threat. And I'm going to, just be this kind of powerful, like I will overpower you in my debates. I will overpower you with how I talk about you. And I'm going to overpower, the enemy. Like he symbolizes American power, I think, in so many ways, economically and everything else. And I think it's like, it's kind of brought to the surface the fact that so many evangelicals are for him. It's just like, God, really? Like, does this guy reflect any sort of like true Christian values? And I think a lot of people would say, oh yeah, he does. Like, what? How? Show me a verse,
Yeah, I feel we've slipped quite a bit from that.
Right. Yeah, totally. He's like, well, he will make this country great again. All right. Well, is that a Christian value? Well, he will make us, economically superior again. Is that, did Jesus say, I really want to make Rome economically superior? And I'm going to, like that just doesn't,
yeah.
Like, and we just take it for granted. Well, no, these are good Christian values. Oh man. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, the funny thing, and real quick, I just want to hit on the quote unquote Old Testament God real quick. Like if you read through the Old Testament, and there's numerous examples where Israel was commanded not to trust in the size of their armies, not to trust in their own might, but rather to rely on the Lord. And when Israel would begin to gain victories over their enemies, it seemed that the leaders seemed to slip away from actually trusting in God. So a lot of people will say, well, okay, Old Testament God is is a violent, vengeful, angry God, and in comparison to Christ, something completely different. But you don't really take that stance in your book. You speak about this, quote, Old Testament God in a little bit of a different light, in that violence was not the original intention of any of this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The question of violence in the Old Testament, it is really complicated. And that's where, when I see people kind of quote the book of Joshua and saying, see, therefore I can defend my, family or whatever with violence. And it's very, very complicated. And it's not just violent, but how to apply ethics from the Old Testament to the New Covenant, that kind of umbrella topic is super complicated, and violence fits under that umbrella. And so I think to tackle that question, how do we reconcile this seemingly very violent God in the Old Testament with Jesus? We have to, get another cup of coffee and sit down and really do some study. Yeah. There are no tweetable answers to that question. There's so many complex questions that come together in that. So yeah, my short answer, this is why I spent 3 or 4 chapters of my book just on the Old Testament. My short answer is, when you look at the book of Genesis, Eden and the shalom that represents Eden there's no violence there. Any movement towards violence is moving away from Eden. Now, when you get to the heart of the Pentateuch, God does meet Israel where they're at. They're living in a very violent society. And we have to understand, and again, every statement's going to raise more questions, but the law, I don't believe, and most people don't believe, reveals the perfect eternal will of God. Like when again, trying to keep this concise, but
sure.
In John or in Deuteronomy 21, you have all these laws like, hey, if you have 2 wives and the one you don't love very much has a son, make sure you don't treat him bad. Like, treat him just as good as the son of the wife that you do love. And you're like, what? Why not just say don't have 2 wives?
Yeah.
Or if you're in war and you see a good-looking virgin and you want her as your wife, then capture her, but you have to let her mourn for 30 days. And you're like, what? Why not just say don't take,
It's progressive. In other words, is that what you're saying? It's kind of like a progressive law?
God meets Israel where they're at with the law, and he wants to bring them to where he wants them to be. And so throughout the Old Testament, there is what's called a progressive ethic. God is moving Israel toward the ideal. The Old Testament isn't the ideal. The law isn't the ideal. It's a step in the right direction towards the ideal. So throughout the Old Testament, you see a drifting away from Eden-like shalom, and then this kind of violent society. But then you have, throughout the Old Testament, a movement, again, away from violence. Throughout the book of Isaiah, Chronicles, which in the Hebrew Bible is at the end of the Old Testament, you have almost these anti-violent statements that almost serve as like a bridge between, Deuteronomy and Joshua and Jesus. And so we just have to, again, recognize that we have to, Scripture is not static. It is dynamic. In other words, that there are things that shift and change, and it doesn't mean God is changing, but, there's a lot of things we obey today that would have been sin in the Old Testament or vice versa. So, that's probably opened up
Oh, that's okay. Hopefully it sparks some conversation, and like you said, it's not going to be answered in a 30-minute phone call, but. And definitely, I want to encourage people to get the book. It's one of the best books I've read recently, and I'm reading quite a bit right now. So I'll finish with some real quick questions. I don't want to keep you too long. And so speaking of reading, I just enjoyed your blog on reading and coming up with a reading plan and whatnot for 2016. Could you give me 1 or 2 must-read recommendations for 2016? What would be 1 or 2 books that you would recommend listeners to get into?
Oh, that's a tough one. I don't know if I can. Let me see. It depends. I'm very topic oriented, so it depends on what they want to learn. If they just want to, I'm even blanking. Right now, I think that, and maybe I'm biased in this, but I think that the homosexuality discussion isn't going away, and I think Christians need to read more broadly on that topic and actually, figure out why they believe what they believe. So I would recommend some stuff there. I'm not going to well, can I recommend my own book?
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'll let you do that.
Okay, yeah, sure.
And then, oh man, I mean, there's some books that shaped me early on in my Christian life. A lot of them by John Piper, and I know he's kind of a polarizing figure. Either you love him or you hate him. And I really enjoyed reading his stuff early on. I think his book on missions was formative in my life. Let the Nations Be Glad. Even older stuff by like A.W. Tozer or J.I. Packer, Knowing God. These were, books that, they're probably not the necessarily the go-to books anymore. But gosh, if you haven't read Knowledge of the Holy by A.W. Tozer or Knowing God by J.I. Packer, I mean, those are good foundational books. Yeah, I'm looking around at my library here.
I tend to get into a track. Like I've been reading a lot of, I hate to say anti-church stuff, but I've been reading a lot of the stuff that's just exposing wrong stuff in the church, and like I need to get away from that and shake my mind up a little bit, get into some other things. So actually, personally, I've been getting into some historical stuff, reading some Chomsky and other social commentary type stuff for myself.
Yeah. Let me give two more. It just came to mind. So I'm reading Greg Boyd's The Myth of a Christian Nation, I think it's called. That book is, I would say, if anybody listening has not read that book, whatever you think about politics in America and violence and war, whatever, like I would just read that book, and it will at the very least provoke a ton of thinking. And then there's, what was the other one? There's one more that came to mind. Shoot, I forgot it.
Anyway. That's okay.
No, I lost it again. It's early.
That's all good, man. All right. Well, yeah. When we get, if you happen to remember when I get your interview up, just leave a comment on there or something. Okay. That'll be cool. And then, just last thing to touch on. I know you're involved in some other stuff besides your writing and speaking and whatnot. And I just found out about Eternity Bible College. If you could just talk about your work with the Bible College, because I think it's a little bit different than traditional seminaries from what I've seen.
Yeah, it's very different. First of all, we offer debt-free education, so you can't beat that. And in our 12 years of existence, we haven't had a single graduate with a penny of school debt. It's not completely free, but it is. We do everything we can we don't offer any bells and whistles. What we do offer is I think, a very rigorous and challenging biblical education, and one that doesn't just target your mind, but targets your heart as well. I think again, this is, maybe I'm biased, but I think we do a good job of shaping people's intellect, but also shaping their heart, so that when they come, they study, they do exams, they do it worshipfully, and they truly, I think are doing a good job of living this stuff out. So it is a very unique kind of a forward-thinking kind of Bible college that I love. The students we're putting out, that just seeing our graduates is just, gosh, these guys are amazing. So yeah.
And you've got distance learning available and all that too.
The whole thing's online. We have
great.
a campus in California, in Boise, where I'm at, and the whole thing's online as well. Yeah.
And do you have any plans for master's coursework?
We've thought about that for many years, and we would love to. I think we're trying to just make sure we're doing the undergrad as well as we can, and then go into the grad. And also, we don't want to. We want to. If it's needed, we'll do it. Like the reason why we started the undergrad is because there's so few Christian schools that are offering debt-free education, and we wanted to blend practice and theology in ways that other schools weren't doing it, and teach students how to think, not what to think. So because there was a niche there, now I know a good number of seminaries I think are doing it well. So if somebody's already doing it, we have no need to do it. So it really, once we look into the master's programs and stuff, their first question will be, why do we need to be doing this if somebody else doing it just as good?
That sounds great. So people can find out about at eternitybiblecollege.com. They can follow you and your blogs at prestonsprinkle.com. And Preston, I thank you so much for coming on the show. I think we squeezed a lot into a half hour, and perhaps we could talk on another issue at some point. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you so much for having me, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks for taking the time.
All right. Take care.
Take care.